So I'm very bullish on it, but I do think it also points to some of the challenges we're going to have with the continuing evolution of LLMs, which is this ongoing, kind of conversation we keep having about it. And I know there were a couple of we're not going to have time to get into it, but there's a really interesting article about Anthropic's research. One of my challenges with the way people talk about LLMs is that all they're doing is predicting the next word, which is true, but it makes it sound like a fancy autocomplete. And this research that Anthropic is doing on Claude, their own LLM, is starting to identify that it's a little bit more than that, or maybe a lot more, where it's actually doing this sort of conceptual layer, and they're able to model out these neurons that fire around concepts and how they can tell the same word means different things in context. And it's like it fires off these different, I want to see a visualization of what that actually means, but it's like the impression they created was like a brain where you're watching the neurons fire. And it was really, really fascinating. And I think it speaks to both the fact that we don't really understand how these things work entirely, and therefore it's not sufficient to say they're just guessing the next word. And yet the data limitations and some of the there's plenty of criticism out there about they're not the future, particularly not the path to AGI. I think those are all valid and warranted. It just speaks to the fact that there's probably more about this we don't know than that we do. And trying to place, again, putting the CIO hat on, what bets you're going to make, you need to try to like get your head around where these limitations and opportunities lie.
Yeah, and I thought that I know you said we weren't going to talk about it, but I guess we are going to talk about it because I think it's interesting as well that Anthropic, with its research, is figuring out the forensics of where some of these language-based assumptions are coming from, and which parameters and which neurons really got hit within its model to figure out how to give you an answer. And I think that understanding of how AI is actually working is going to be an important next step from an AI governance perspective. It's not a coincidence that Anthropic recently hired a former OpenAI safety lead. I think Anthropic is really pushing their brand to be the more understandable AI or the more ethical AI. And regardless of the branding of ethics, I think that means that they are probably going to take more of a lead on showing how AI works. And I feel like when the generative AI topic really took off a couple of years ago now, it was partially luck. OpenAI threw a lot of stuff against the wall, and this ended up happening to be the perfect way to look at AI in a way that was very consumable. But the following 18 to 24 months have kind of shown that although there's been some work on productizing and some work on making the APIs work better, that they didn't really understand what they had created. They just knew that this viral thing had happened, and now we have to figure out why it works so well and what we find so appealing about it, other than that it gives us an answer.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and I wasn't trying to take us down this hole because I know it's a big conversation. I will link to it, and maybe we'll talk about it more next week. But
Yeah,
it's definitely worth digging into because it exposes. I think it's our human nature to want to be reductive. We want to take something, boil it down into a way we can get our head around. And the reality is that these things are way too complex to boil down that simply. And I think it's an important conversation for the CIO because you need to understand the risk. You need to understand limitations. And the current conversation right now has been too limiting, I think, as far as what that means, both in terms of what it may be able to do, what its limitations are, what the risk factors are around hallucinations. I'm not functioning today, but all of those pieces. So I think it's all relevant, but I know we have other things we want to keep talking about.